Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's The Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look at the important articles which have appeared in today's newspaper, the Delhi edition, and we shall be holding the discussion for each of these articles in relevant detail. So overall, the 6 topics that we are going to discuss, that is going to be relevant from GS paper 1 to GS paper 3, even in the portion of your essay as well. So the topics that we are going to hold the discussion for is the formation of an industry-led coalition of the various different multinational companies coming on the same platform when it comes to G20 for developing a kind of a circular economy. Then we shall also be taking a look at the National Research Foundation Bill, which has been approved by the Union Cabinet, and what its role is going to be, and also we are going to look into the larger perspective of the importance of research, the relevance of research, what is the amount of investment that India as a country puts in when research is concerned, and what are the contemporary countries doing in terms of research investments. Where is it that we can improvise? Then the hornet's nest in the Forest Amendment Bill, we shall be addressing the concerns raised by the Forest Amendment Bill, and also how the preamble, as has been stated by the amendment bill, is something which is very different from the realities of that bill in itself. And then we shall be understanding the problem faced in the various different floodplains in the country with the example of the Yamuna floodplains and how it is leading to urban disasters such as flooding and very frequent disasters happening in the urban areas. Then a couple of topics that we are going to cover in a precise and a brief manner for your prelims perspective is going to be the Cinematograph bill, which has been passed by the Rajya Sabha, as well as the oncoming or the possibility of a new PLI scheme to be introduced in the chemical sector, chemicals and petrochemicals. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion for the first topic. And the first topic is basically about circular economy. Now here, this has appeared in page 5 of the Delhi edition. And this is going to be relevant for your GS3. So here, we do know that currently India holds the presidency for G20 forum. And that is why over the last year or so, there have been various different types of meetings of finance ministers, meeting for external affairs ministers, etc., which have been conducted in India. Now recently you have had such a meeting where you had the development of a coalition for development of circular economy. Now, even though we had discussed yesterday and day before yesterday about the requirement and importance of circular economy, when we talk about circular economy, it is in order to attain sustainability. And that circular economy basically comprises of reduce, reuse, and recycle. So that will end up initiating a kind of a various different demand in areas such as, let's say, scrap vendors, let's say refurbishers, and there also an aggregate net demand will be created which can always end up benefiting the economic system. So here, what the various different countries of the G20 forum initiated by the multinational companies, and these multinational companies, they actually varied from one sector to another. They were not only restricted to one particular sector. Now, these included FMCG. FMCG, when you talk about, you have the fast moving consumer goods, the daily consumer items that we have. Now, they are one of the largest generators of plastic waste that we have or that we observe in our country. Then even the iron and steel manufacturers, all of them have participated in formation of this industry-led coalition. Now, remember, day before yesterday, when we were talking about the importance or the role that India can play as the president of the G20 forum, we discussed the 4 key principles driving India's stand at the moment. And one of the principles, important principles, was industry-led coalition to drive the circular economy. So what is this particular coalition about? So that is, the coalition is named as the Resource Efficiency Circular Economy Industry Coalition. So first of all, we have to understand the basics of circular economy here, that how is it that the circular economy is going to benefit us, and that is precisely because when we talk about a circular economy, let's suppose we consider any product any object, let's say plastic waste, or let's assume e-waste. Now plastic or e-waste, if generally what is it the approach that we adopt? Now here the environment minister also has basically given the approach that we adopt, and the approach that is generally followed across the globe is the take, make and waste approach. What is that? That is the take, make and waste approach, where we take a resource, we manufacture a product out of it, right? That is the manufacturing process, and then eventually we dispose it off. But let's say if we use plastic waste or any plastic items or any electronic devices that we have, now after that if we are able to extract some amount of meaningful materials which can be used in the formation or the production of a new product, so that will be in a kind of a processing infrastructure. Now wherever that processing will be carried out, that will end up providing not only environmental cleanliness but also will ensure provision of jobs for larger section of the people, because there will be certain companies which will be specializing in processing of those devices. For example, let us take the case of any electronic device. Let's take the case of your mobile phones that you operate. Now let's assume we take any of these mobile phone manufacturers such as Apple. Let's consider Apple as an example. Now Apple, when it manufactures the mobile phone, it has got the specialty in manufacturing of mobile phone. It doesn't have the specialty in extracting the important items of it, processing the important items out of it, extracting the various different precious metals such as gold, silver, tin, etc. which are used, and then again selling it in the commodities market. So that is a specialty which maybe Apple will not have. I'm sure Apple will not have. So that is where you need the role of some other companies to come into the place as well. And when you process it, you basically can sell it in the commodities market, exchange it in the commodities market as well. And that comes under the phase of recycle, where you retain certain important products and you sell off the rest or you dispose of the rest. Now the problem that arises here, especially in the developing nations of the world, is that disposal of these wastes and handling and recycling of these wastes is largely carried out in the unofficial, or rather which is not always following the required norms and regulations. It is something which is followed or observed in various different types of unorganized sectors, so to say. Now these unorganized sectors, they don't take care of the proper disposal of the waste. They don't follow the standard operating procedure when it comes to handling with critical, let's say radioactive waste or heavy metallic waste. They don't have that expertise. And even the workers who are deployed there, who work there, even those workers, they are exposed to various vagaries and different types of diseases such as silicosis, which oftentimes breeds from these recycling plants because of inhalation of different types of metallic dust due to lack of PPE kits, lack of proper working environment and so on. So there is a multifarious damage which is done. Damage in the health of the people as well, long-term damage in the environment as well, and wastage as well. So if you have a proper development of a circular economy where you have specialized firms working into this, that system is going to improve quite sufficiently. And then eventually that will be used for remanufacturing or refurbishing of the products. Now, this refurbishing of the products, if it is carried out efficiently, it will also bring down the prices of the goods in general. For example, take the case of any of the plastic manufacturers. Now, majority of the plastic, if it is recycled, the price of the newer plastic, that is bound to come down because you will have sudden oversupply of commodity in the market. So what this will do is, it reduces the price of the product. And when the price of the product comes down, what happens? Any good that you go to buy in the market, if that price comes down, immediately it becomes very attractive for everyone. Isn't it? So that leads to increase in demand. And with increase in demand, there will be greater production as well. With greater production, even when we talk about the tax realization, when we talk about in general the job creation, everything, in fact, the entirety of the economy will get a much required boost. So that is why it is being promoted. Now, India on this platform has also advocated the changes that it has done in the plastic waste management bill and also in the e-waste management. The various different changes have been brought about where EPR norms, what are EPR norms? That is extended producer responsibility. That is EPR, extended producer responsibility. Now, under the EPR norms, it is the producer who is made in charge or who is made responsible for handling of the waste products. So these EPR norms have been strengthened by provision of the tradable certificates. Now let us understand what is this concept of tradable certificates which India has basically introduced in a variety of different areas, be it e-waste, be it biomedical waste, be it even plastic waste. So what are these tradable certificates? And when it comes to plastic waste, there has been a considerable success which has been achieved in this. Now here, as per the amendments in these waste management acts that have been done, there has been a target which has been fixed for various PIBOs. PIBOs here refers to, when I refer to PIBO or when it is generally referred, it refers to producers, importers, brand owners. Now these guys or these PIBOs, they have a fixed target, and that target is based upon their sales figure or their production figure for the past year. So dependent upon production. Now what is this target about? The fixed target which is being set, that is for, let's say this year I will take care of 1 ton of plastic waste which has been generated or 1 ton of e-waste which has been generated. So this target is for handling of waste. Now here, where do the tradable certificates figure out? So let's suppose an individual company, let's take the case of a company A. Now this company has got a target of handling, let's say, 10 tons of waste. Now we have already seen that not every company will have the specialization in handling of the waste. A company which is manufacturing a mobile phone obviously would never have thought about gaining a specialization in how to handle this waste as well. So what these companies end up doing is they would rather end up preferring that some other individual, some other enterprise, some other kind of a company or a firm who specializes in waste handling. Let's take the case of a special company B. Now this company B has got its people on the ground, has got a liaisoning with the urban local bodies and knows where the waste is going to be disposed, how to extract the electronic items from those waste and how to reprocess those waste. So this B has got specialization in that. So this B on an annual basis, let's suppose, takes care or handles 100 tons of waste. Okay. Now, for the 100 tons of waste that it has handled, it will be given certain certificate. Certificate, a kind of an accreditation, a kind of an approval from the agencies, the government bodies as well, that yes, this company B has taken care of this much amount of waste. Now, the mobile manufacturer or any plastic manufacturer A, which had a target of 10 tons, it has got no specialty so as to how to approach the waste, how to segregate the waste, how to handle the waste. It is unable to meet the target. So what it will do is, it will buy certificate worth 10 tons. Buys the certificate as per target. And thereby, for that money or for that certificate, B is paid some amount of money. So B also earns in the process, and B earns for its specialization that it has, whereas A is able to fulfill its targets. So this is the tradable EPR certificate. This certificate is tradable, can be traded. So this is the change that India has brought in when it comes to its EPR regulations, and that is where it has become much more stringent, and also it has provided an ease for the various different companies, PIBOs, in order to adhere to their targets, thereby leading to an increased cleanliness of the environment. So here, for your mains purpose, you have to be aware of these tradable EPR certificates. How do they work? Because that has been a tremendous change which has been brought about. And for your prelims purpose, you have to be aware of this coalition that has been led by the industry themselves, the multinational companies themselves. You don't need to learn particularly which industries are involved. A wide gamut of sectors are involved, right from the portion of, as I already told you, FMCG, steel sector, automobile, everyone is involved in this. So that is where resource efficiency. And what is the key aim? To attain sustainability and reduce the impact on climate. Now, then coming on to the next topic which has appeared in the editorial section, and that is weighing in on the National Research Foundation Bill. Now this has appeared in page 6. Now this is something which has been relevant for the portion of essay in general for a very long period of time. Because if you take a look at the past trend analysis of the questions which have appeared in the essay paper, majority of the questions, or many of the questions rather, which have concentrated on areas such as education, they have harped upon the importance of research. Now here, what is this National Research Foundation Bill? So recently this has been cleared by the Union Cabinet and has not been introduced in the Parliament as of now. So the norm is, once it has been cleared by the Union Cabinet, then it will be introduced in the Parliament, and then eventually it is cleared and becomes an act. So in this case, what are the concerns which have been raised? First of all, now the National Research Foundation is an apex body, is a top body which is aimed to be established in order to facilitate research purposes in the country. So that is the basic purpose that is being mooted for NRF, National Research Foundation. So it is supposed to be the apex body for researchers. Now, the idea of establishment of this National Research Foundation was actually given by the Kasturi Rangan Committee on the education. So you had the Kasturi Rangan Committee which had been set up for the national education policy. So it is based upon, idea is based upon the recommendation of Kasturi Rangan Committee. Okay. Now what this committee actually proposed is that, look, in order to bolster the research, the amount of research that is being carried out in the country, we need to develop one of this institute or one such kind of an apex body which will take care of the entire area of research, the entire gamut of research being carried out in various different institutions. Because for a long period of time it has been realized that in order to develop research is very, very important, but then that research, the investment carried out in that area is abysmally low. Even this article points out that when we talk about India and India's investment in research and development, that has been reducing ever since the past decade and a half, where for the past decade and a half that reduction has brought the amount of investment being carried out in research and development to a low figure of 0.65%. Just to give you an idea, our investment in research is only around 0.65% of GDP, which is significantly low. If you compare with much larger economies such as United States, China, etc., there the comparative figure for United States, it is 2.8%. For China, the amount invested in research is 2.1%. But now look at the countries who are actually investing large amounts in research. That is Israel, where it is 4.3%, and also South Korea, where it is 4.2%. So, if the other important countries, and we are not going to compare ourselves with various different countries which are not even in the race for economic development, but if you want to attain a kind of an economic proficiency, a kind of a cutting edge technology where you don't have to be dependent on borrowing technology from others, you need to be investing somewhere in this particular tune. So that is something which was the expectation set by the entire academia as well as the researchers, that now that the NRF will come into the picture, there will be a greater amount of investment, and this NRF is supposed to replace the SERB, that is the Scientific and Engineering Research Body. So that SERB is supposed to be replaced. Now, this SERB was established as a statutory organization under the Department of Science and Tech, purely for funding research and research-based studies. That was the prime purpose of it. So this is being replaced. So it was created as an autonomous organization. Again, these are the pointers relevant for your prelims. So it was set up as per the SERB Act of 2008. Act of 2008. Now this SERB is going to be replaced by NRF. Now ideally, when Kasturi Rangan committee put up this recommendation of setting up of NRF, the expectation was that just like in our country we have a host of various organizations which are associated with providing funding for research, ensuring and coordinating that proper research is carried on, this NRF will also be another such organization. But when this bill was brought out, that bill basically clarified that this will be replaced, or SERB will be replaced by NRF. So here, what are the various other organizations which fund research in our country? So if you take a look at it, right from the Department of Science and Technology to the Department of Atomic Energy, Department of Biotech, then you have ICAR, Indian Council for Agricultural Research, Indian Council for Medical Research, Indian Council for Historical Research, as well as the University Grants Commission. All these organizations, they in some way or the other are responsible for funding and carrying out research in our country. Now there are two schools of thought. Primarily, whenever someone comes across the fact that you have so many different funding organizations or research bodies, there are two prominent school of thoughts which come into the picture. First is, let us have only one organization which takes care or handles all the research. And the other school of thought is, let there be a diversified body providing funding to the various organizations as and when the requirement arises. So both the schools of thought have some amount of merit and some amount of disadvantage is associated. So when we talk about multiple organizations, now, what can be the benefit of it? Ideally, you should be aware of both the sides of the argument. So multiple organization, the benefit will be sectoral research. Sector specific research can be carried out. Isn't it? Then also, ideally on paper, if you have a different research body for medical research, different research body for the historical research, etc., funding and availability and clearance for funding should also be comparatively easier. Clearance should be easier, which is not the case ideally. In the practical scenario, that clearance is very difficult. Okay. So these are few of the benefits, but what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages are there is such a huge amount of red tapeism, overlapping which happens, that if, let's say, as an individual, if you have experienced this, you go to any organization to secure some funding, they will immediately send you to some other organization that it comes under the purview of their role, and we are not supposed to provide that. So there is a lot of overlap in terms of their area or their domains, and there is no clear-cut specified standard operating procedure that under what condition can a research be funded. Is there any basis for that funding to be provided? Is there a timeline which has to be provided? So that is something which is lacking. So there is no accountability that these organizations, they accrue to themselves. It is very easily, it can be provided an analogy to passing the baton to someone else, that individual or that organization is responsible. So here, through this article, let us first of all analyze what are the impediments in the research being carried out and what should be the way forward. We have seen that already the research percentage or the amount invested in research is very low. So that is a major problem, right? Lack of investment. Now, even when we talk about the total amount invested in research and development, significant majority of that is government backed. In our country, it is the government backed research which is the most dominant one, but that is not the case in other areas. When you talk about a country like China, when you talk about a country like, let's say, United States, they have a significant amount of private participation in that research funding. We don't have that. So lack of private participation. And why is it that we have a lack of private participation? When we have so many different private companies, private organizations doing well on a global scale, why is it that the companies are not investing significantly in research in our country? That brings us to the next problem, and that is the gap between the industry and institute. What is being taught in the institutes, what is being carried out as a curriculum study in the institutes, that is not relevant for the industry anymore. Be it in majority of the areas, for example in science and tech, for example in engineering sector, in general in the STEM sector, if you will analyze the curriculum which is being followed and taught in our country, that is something, or that technology has been phased out almost 20 years back in the rest of the world. So the industry or the institutions are no longer relevant to the industry. So the industry does not trust the institutions. That is why all the industry leaders, they come upon the various platforms and they all end up narrating the same problem, that majority of the graduates in our country, they are not employable. Right? So, no institute industry connect. That institute industry connect, that is something which is lacking. So that is why you don't have, many people also don't go into research. You can take care of your, take the case of your own examples as well. How many of your batchmates do you know who went into the area of research? Very few of them would have gone there. Why is it? Because that field is not very lucrative. Why? Because there is no particular backing in terms of funding. People are not assured if they will be earning enough if they carry out the researches. So that is why the participation of the general public is also very low. Due to this, participation is very low. Now what happens is, if you have an industry connect, if the industry, let's say, gives a demand that I want development in space tech, and for that I will fund any institute for $1 billion, or let's say $300 million, $400 million, etc. So more and more people will be incentivized to do the sector-based research as well. So what is the way forward here? The way forward is very simple. First of all, we need to develop that research ecosystem. And how will that happen? That will happen by changing the curriculum, by improving the curriculum, and by making the curriculum industry relevant. Secondly, we need to ensure that each and every investment which is being carried out in the research, whether we have to analyze in which area are we concentrating those research funds into, and whether it is yielding some result or not. If it is not, we need to recalibrate our position again, and we need to be setting the priority sectors of the modern tech, the cutting edge tech, AI, blockchain, space tech. So that is where we need to provide much more funding. We also need to develop certain institutes, primarily just like you have Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Now that is one of the premier research-based organizations. So we need to establish more such research-based organizations and institutions as well. And the crux of it is that as of now, India is on the verge of enjoying a kind of a demographic dividend where a significant amount of our population is going to enter into the working age group. Now, if we don't capitalize on the research right now, it will have long-term reverse ramification. Because take the case of any of the civilizations across the world, they have developed on the back of research activity and cutting edge technology. That is where UPSC had asked a question in the essay as well, where the growth of science and technology is the panacea for the development of various nations. So this is where research is required for development of your manufacturing prowess, for job generation, for keeping relevance in the modern tech, and also fulfillment of the requirement of the general citizenry at large. So that is about this article. Now, then we come to the next article, the hornet's nest in the Forest Amendment Bill. So the Forest Amendment Bill, the provisions of which we discussed in detail yesterday, where we talked about the fact that this amendment bill, it seeks to amend the Forest Act of 1980. That is being amended. Now here, this Forest Act of 1980 also provided a definition of the forest that we had seen, that in any area where the tree cover having a canopy density or a canopy cover of more than 10% of the land, where the area of the land is in the minimum of 1 hectare, that can be regarded as a forest. But then notification and an area being notified as a forest, that in itself is a complex task. So that is where certain areas have been registered, notified as and designated as forest land by the state and the central governments. But there are many larger areas which have not been designated as the forest land, but they have a significant amount of tree cover as well. So in those areas, rampant deforestation used to be carried out regularly. Now, Supreme Court in its landmark judgment, that is the T.N. Godavarman case of 1996, that is considered to be landmark. So T.N. Godavarman case versus Union of India, 1996. Now in this, the Supreme Court basically had observed that when you are taking care of the environment, don't go for the aspect of what you have defined as a forest in a law. Take the case of the forest in its true spirit. Right? So when you consider a forest in its true spirit, you are not concerned whether the plantation of the trees has been happening in 1 hectare or 0.9 hectare or 1.2 hectare. If there are trees, they need to be protected. So this was in order to discourage deforestation entirely. It should not be that, okay, only in the area that we have designated as a forest will not carry out deforestation, rest all the trees will chop it off. Various different administrations at the different states, at the various different levels, they have incessantly always have felt a kind of an overwhelming pressure from the side of the industry, and due to which they have diverted many of the areas of the forest land. Now, this amendment bill, the purpose to bring this amendment bill was, now whenever you introduce a bill, you bring about a preamble for that bill as well, that what is the objective of it. So the objective that the bill cited was to increase the forest cover, to help India attain net zero, and net zero emission requirement by 2070. So the preamble was very, in a way, elusive and significantly transcendental when it comes to environmental conservation. But simultaneously, you have to understand that the norms of the bill, they are in a way seen to be encouraging the ease of doing business, in the sense that many of the land parcels, they have been eliminated from the purview of Forest Act altogether. And why has that been done? Understand the spirit behind it, not the motive that has been cited in the preamble. So what is the motive, real motive behind passing this kind of an amendment? The motive is, as indicated by the article, is that earlier many of the infrastructural projects, many of the various different projects would be stuck in limbo for 10 years, 20 years, 15 years because of the lack of clearances. Timely clearances were not to be provided. Now, by exempting many of these areas from the purview of the Forest Act, that requirement of clearance is done away with, so that faster infrastructure building, faster construction, that can be carried on. But what this article argues is that, look, if any system is flawed, if let's say that compliance system and the clearance, provision of clearance by the ministry, if that system is flawed where for clearance it takes 6 months, 10 months, rather than uprooting the system, why not improve the system? But the counter argument to that is that there have been numerous efforts to improve the system for 2 to 3 decades and it has not happened. So that is why the system in itself has been uprooted. So what are the various concerns that have been indicated? Let us analyze that. So it is contradictory to the spirit of the Godavarman case, and here in terms of what constitutes a forest. Okay. What eventually does constitute a forest? So that is where Supreme Court took a universal view. Wherever you have the trees, consider them as forests, don't cut them. But as per the acts, you have the areas notified, regulated, designated and delineated by the state and the central government. And rest of the areas, it is a kind of a free run. So due to this, when the new amendment bill has been passed, it has got certain delineations that, okay, only the forest land considered to be or designated under the Forest Act 1927 and the Forest Act of 1980, they will be considered under that purview. Rest of them have been eliminated. Now, by eliminating and providing exemptions to a large sector, it will have an impact on 28% of India's forest cover, which is huge. Close to around 2 lakh square kilometer of land area, or rather forested area, will be influenced. And here does not always necessarily mean that where you have large trees only protect them. So here the example can be taken in the region of Delhi. Now, in the western part and the southwestern part of Delhi, you have the Aravali biodiversity landscape. Now, there had been rampant amount of construction and also in many of the cases illegal settlements which had happened in that area, degrading that landscape, carrying out deforestation of that landscape. Now, that is a region where due to deforestation, water scarcity was very prominently felt, particularly in the drier areas of western part and southwestern part of Delhi. Ever since the Aravali biodiversity region has been protected, those areas of trees, the cutting of them have been stopped. Natural landscape has been allowed to emerge and spruce up. Automatically, there has been an increased realization of water potential in that area. Majority of the urban sectors of our country, majority of the metropolitan tier 1 cities of our country, whichever area that you can relate to, take the example of that, they are suffering from some or the other form of water scarcity, and trees have got an important role to play in that. By exempting these particular regions or provision of exemption for these regions not covered under Forest Act 1980 or Indian Forest Act of 1927, so that brings about an increased damage to the urban ecosystem. Now, this particular bill also has a provision that 100 kilometers from the bordering areas, those areas will be exempted from any kind of clarification or any kind of, let's say, clearance which is required for construction activities for bolstering of security infrastructure. While the objective is significantly novel, objective is very relevant and well suited, but understand the impact of it. Now, India has got 4 different biodiversity hotspots. I hope you are aware of it, that which of these are India's, or which of these biodiversity hotspots actually lie in India. You will observe that in the north we have the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, which continues all the way into the region of Jammu Kashmir, into the region of Ladakh, and in many of the areas very close to the border, the line of actual control as well, and in certain cases, even in the case of international border also, it is very close to the borderline. Then this continues in the northeastern region as well, where you have the border with China. Then you have another biodiversity hotspot, that is the Indo-Burma. So you have the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, then you have the very critical Indo-Burma hotspot. Then you have the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. And also you have the Sundaland. Sundaland is one of those hotspots which actually lies in the region of Java, Sumatra, and in India it exists only in the region of Great Nicobar Islands, or in India it exists in the region of Nicobar group of islands. Now understand the implication of the bill in this case. This bill tells us that 100 kilometers from the border area, you don't need clearances. Those lands are exempted, the forest lands are exempted. Now in this situation, when we talk about a region like the Sundaland biodiversity hotspot which lies in the Great Nicobar region, now there the island size in itself is very, very small. So there the islands, even though they are small, they are densely vegetated. So in those regions, if you carry out rampant deforestation without taking clearances or without the requirement of the clearances, what will happen to the biodiversity, the very pristine and critical biodiversity that you find in these areas? Everything will go to the waste, because in those cases majority of the projects carried out in the region of, let's say, Great Nicobar or in Arunachal Pradesh, they will be lying within 100 kilometers. So that is why the exemption, the large scale exemption which is provided, can be counterproductive as well. So what is the way forward? So this article actually argues that rather than dismantling the clearance system, provide the clearance on case-to-case basis. So you need to have a kind of a case-to-case basis, and case-to-case scrutiny can be carried out and should be carried out. Then here example of Nepal has also been cited. In what manner or in what purview? So here, in the preservation and conservation of forest, the local community is not made a meaningful partner in that conservation process. Here, that is where the article argues that by delineating or by providing newer laws and amendments where you have not taken the input of the local forest community or the local forest dwellers, you are alienating them from the process of conservation. And that is where the example of Nepal has been taken, where the forested areas, they were left to the local indigenous people and the local indigenous population, and that is where the forest cover increased quite tremendously, almost 1.5 times from the past calculation. And that has been because the indigenous community, when you make them a stakeholder in the process of conservation, it is their interest as well to conserve the forest, because that forest will be providing them with the meaningful livelihood and employment generation as well. So that is where the example of Nepal is given for empowering forest dwellers and local population. Okay. Then establishment of a process of clearance, we have talked about it, in order to ensure faster clearance, because earlier Environment Ministry in a very significant way had gained a fame, or rather defamation, for significant policy paralysis where the files would be stuck there for years altogether. Eventually, the investing company would withdraw that investment. So India has suffered significant amount of economic losses because of that. So that is the purpose or the motive behind bringing this bill, in order to spruce up that economic development, but at what cost? That is a question that remains relevant. Okay, so the details of the article and details of the bill rather we had discussed in yesterday's session itself. So these are the concerns which have been raised by this article today. Now, then coming to the anatomy of the Yamuna floodplains. Now here, this entire detailed explainer which talks about the Yamuna floodplains and rather talks about the problem of urban flooding. That is again a question which UPSC has been asking and is relevant in general for almost all the urban areas. Take the case of any of the urban locales, be it Hyderabad, be it Mumbai, be it Delhi, be it Bangalore, be it Chennai, all the urban locations of the country, they are facing the threat of flooding. Every rainy season, they experience some or the other form of flooding, some or the other level of floods which ravage that particular area. Now here, what does this article talk about? This talks about the detail of where river Yamuna enters through Delhi, how it passes through various different areas and regions. So you don't need to get into the nitty-gritties of which particular location in Delhi is where the Yamuna enters and so on. I will show you the kind of a schematic image, and with this image also you can gauge out certain parameters where you will observe that as the river Yamuna enters, you will also experience by the image itself that its flow is significantly altered in the middle phase, right? And then again it broadens a bit, it gets some breathing space. So what is a floodplain first of all? So when we talk about Yamuna floodplain, or in general the floodplain of any particular river, what do we mean by a floodplain? So floodplains are depositional features, depositional landforms of rivers. Now, if let's say, if you have to define the morphology or the topography, let's say this is the river channel through which the river is flowing, and this is the plain area. So if this is the channel through which the river water flows, at some point of time during flooding, etc., whenever the river floods or overfloods, it carries out deposits of silt and sediments in the nearby plain region. Now these deposits have been carried out when the river had been flooded, and hence these very fertile deposits in general, they are referred to as floodplains of the river. So these floodplains, they are significantly fertile. So in many of the areas they are used for agricultural purposes as well. In Delhi itself, you have thousands of acres of land of Yamuna floodplains which is being utilized for agricultural activities, particularly horticultural crops, which require very fertile soil condition. Now the river ends up depositing fresh sediments and fresh silt every year, so that brings about its own innate fertility along with that. So agriculture is one of those areas or sectors which booms in these regions. Now when agriculture will be carried out, there will also be encroachment, isn't it? If you, let's say, carry out agriculture in this particular portion, you will build certain supporting structures, there will be encroachment. So in a way, you are restricting the floodplain. Now also, a region like Delhi, a region like Hyderabad, a region like Mumbai, they experience large influx of migrants in the tune of crores of population every year. Not every year crores of people come in, but in general, the population does come in large quantities. Now, in those cases, where do the migrant workers and migrant laborers settle? Where will they live? Because affordable housing in itself is a very rare commodity. An individual who has migrated from their home state for the lack of economic income, they won't be buying a house in a posh society of a major urban city. So where do they settle? So majority of the urban migrants, they settle down in the floodplains. So migrant and poor population. Now, when we talk about the migration trends when it comes to Delhi, so Delhi has basically been witnessing migration and influx of migration from right from the time of independence and partition, where in the post-partition country you had number of people coming over to Delhi and settling down in the region around the floodplains, and that is where many of these areas settled down. For example, when you take a look at the Gandhinagar region, etc., all of them, they were established at that point of time. Now after that you had the Asian Games which were held, that also brought in lot of migrant laborers, they also settled down. So that has continued, and all of these constructions have been carried out in the floodplains. Now why is that bad? Because ideally when you take a look at the floodplains, what is the role played by floodplains in general? These floodplains are there to soak in excess amount of water that the river generates. During the time of the rainy season, obviously the river will have greater amount of water. So in those cases, whenever the river has excess water, this soil will absorb that, will send it to recharge the underground water. And also sufficiently and significantly during the dry season, that water will be recirculated back into the river, and that is how river's flow is maintained throughout the year. That is the general river morphology or the river behavior and the river flow pattern. But what has been happening, as you have more people settling down in the region, what will happen to waste disposal? Many of this location, they do not have proper sanitation as well. So there will be large amount of waste as well which will be disposed. Now that waste in a way prevents that seeping and percolation of water and that excess absorption power. So you have dumping of solid waste. This in a way inhibits the absorption power of the floodplain. And then again, infrastructure building, when it is carried out in an unscientific way, what it again manages to do is it fragments the floodplain, reducing its overall capacity for absorption. So infra building now, all these, what they have done is reduce the capacity of floodplains. To do what? To absorb excess water and to regenerate that water back during the dry conditions. So that is why we come across a scenario when there is sudden excessive rainfall, that floodplain cannot absorb anything, and we have ensured that this river doesn't have any place to expand in case of excess rainfall. So where will the river water go? River water eventually will show its own potential and its own power. That is why you have the incessant flooding, and that is where the master plan for any urban area is the plan required for the long-term development. The master plan needs to address this. In the case of Delhi, there has been a zonation for the Yamuna floodplains which are being done, but those, even in that master plan, there is a kind of a frequent flouting of the norms, and that is based upon the various pressures that are exerted. For example, a case has also been cited where, based upon the NGT or the National Green Tribunal order, significant amount of those floodplains area, they were vacated only to be replaced by private builders building the towers in those areas. So that is where we need to develop a proper master plan for all the urban areas, keeping the track of the river floodplains. Because in the case of Hyderabad, which is the river Musi also faces the same problem in the case of its floodplains, and that is why Hyderabad experiences flooding whenever there is a slightly greater than average rainfall. In the case of Mumbai, it is the river Mithi. You have the Mithi river, and even in the case of Mithi river, just like the case of river Yamuna, because of dumping of waste, because of encroachment in these areas, the river will always end up overflowing. So all the urban cities face this. So what is the way forward? You need to have development of the master plan, right? Then you need to respect the river's right to expand. river's right to expand. Okay. And when we say expand, means what? That in case of excess rainfall, there is a channel or there is a space for that flow of excess water. Artificial construction of embankments, they don't help. Because when you have constructed an embankment, let's suppose like this, if this is a river, you have constructed a solid embankment here. Now the water will keep piling up. And in case, let's suppose there is any breach in any of these embankments, which has happened in Delhi. Let's suppose any of these embankments get breached. What will happen? Immediately all that water will rush in and the level of floods will be simply incomparable and intolerable. So that is why even these artificial embankments do not help. The river should have natural space to flow. Space to flow and accommodate excess water. And for that, even cleaning and desilting of the rivers is a must. Okay? Now, that is what you need to understand for the anatomy of the floodplains. Now we come to a couple of topics relevant for your prelims. So, Rajya Sabha passed the Cinematographer bill, and that is aimed at curbing piracy. Piracy is one of the very predominant issues that we have, where you have the pirated videos, pirated versions of the movies, etc., which are circulated, causing a huge loss of revenue to the movie makers, to the producers. And initially people think, and the prime conception is that, look, if we are getting it for cheap, these movie makers are anyways very, very rich. What will they do with so much amount of money? But piracy impacts the poorer section in that industry quite significantly, because the revenue that is generated by a movie, it is used in order to pay the wages for the various different, let's say, spot boys and various different people involved in the production unit. So that is why piracy needs to be stopped, and that is where the Cinematographer bill or Cinematograph Amendment Bill Amendment Bill 2023. It will replace the Cinematographer Act 1952. It has made the provisions regarding piracy much more stringent, leading to various not only pecuniary or financial penalties, but also leading to jail term as well. The movies also will have a kind of a designation in terms of the viewership. So you will have a designation of UA 7+, UA 13+, UA 16+. So that categorization will be done based upon the audience specific requirement, that which movie is suitable for which group of audience. So 7+ means anyone above the age of 7 can watch this, anyone above the age of, let's say, 15 can watch this. So that has also witnessed some amount of cosmetic changes in this particular amendment. Then government may extend the PLI scheme, production linked incentive scheme, to chemicals and petrochemicals in order to boost the demand, or rather the production of chemicals in our country. Because when we talk about the import of various different materials that India has, chemicals and petrochemicals are amongst the larger imports that we actually carry out. So the finance minister said that, and has made an observation, that various different industries across the globe, from Aramco to various different chemical industries, BASF, etc., they are ready to invest, but we need to develop our own production capabilities as well. And that is where public-private partnership, or rather the partnership between different private players, have also been mooted and advocated, that get into the partnership with these international partners, but ensure that you develop your own capacity and capability as well, so that when the PLI scheme is initiated in this sector, there is a boost in production. And what that will do, that will reduce our import bill. So from this, what is relevant is, you need to understand what is this PLI. So I hope it is understood that it is a production linked incentive which is given based upon what you produce and how much you produce. And secondly, Chemicals, they form an important component of our import basket. So by limiting that particular import, or rather by producing chemicals in your own country in significant proportion, that foreign exchange reserve can also be saved. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the couple of questions from here. So discuss the importance of maintaining the floodplain ecosystem of the rivers, especially in urban areas. This is a GS paper 1 topic, which I will again reiterate has been repeated by UPSC multiple times in the mains exam. So it is a 10 marker 150 worded answer. So in this, first of all, in the introduction, what do you have to write? So introduction here you can write or create in two different ways. One is a way where you define what do we understand by floodplain. The second way is where you talk about that majority of the urban areas of the world are experiencing increased amount of disasters, particularly initiated or led by the river floodplains getting encroached and destruction of the river floodplains. So in any of the ways you can introduce. After you have provided the introduction, always advisable to provide a kind of a relevant image of the floodplain of the river channel. Then talk about it, that how the river has got the right to expand during the rainy seasons and during the season of excessive rainfall. And eventually after that, you talk about why is it that the floodplains, especially in the urban areas, they are facing a tough time and encroachments. So you talk about agriculture, why agriculture is being carried out because of fresh silt. Then you talk about the urban migrant laborers settling in that area. So all these factors you can discuss. What can be done? A master plan should be very strict and should take care of the flow of the river even during the rainy season. Natural landscape should be allowed to develop, including trees, and parks should be allowed to develop in the region of the floodplains, and recharge of groundwater aquifer, etc. will also take. So in this, citing of examples is very important. Please do not write an answer without citing an example in this case. Cite an example. You have the various urban areas. Cite the example of the rivers passing through the urban areas and how those rivers are causing floods. So Musi River in Hyderabad, Mithi River in Mumbai, Yamuna in Delhi. These are your ideal examples. Then highlight the role played by G20 in achieving circular economy for attaining sustainability. So here you have to talk about, first of all, again in the introduction, you have to address the portion of what do you understand by circular economy, and then you have to talk about the G20 forum, the formation of the coalition, the development of a circular economy, the participation of the various different members, and also how the countries, various different countries can benefit from India's experience of EPR regulations, how PIBOs can actually benefit from that. So that is what is required to be written in this. So that will be all for our discussion of the articles for the Hindu newspaper for today. I hope that is a discussion which has been meaningful and fruitful for you. If you like the content, please don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.